Hi there. We're going to look at building a studio today. This is the first time I've been actually able to build a real studio at home, so it's quite an exciting time for me. So I'm going to show you the first part of construction and talk through some of the decisions that we made. I'm going to talk about two other things. One is my preferred way of working, which is to have collaborators in the room with me, and for us all to be wearing headphones or not, depending on the appropriateness and how we're recording stuff. And that's really kind of driven the overall design of just having one big control room, of not having a separate recording space or any booths or anything like that. I much prefer to have a nice big space where I can spread loads of instruments out and, people can get all their stuff out or their gear out, and we can kind of work in the same room. So that's how it's going to work best for me. So that's the key element to this. And then beyond that, it's about looking at my kind of workflow. And I've changed the way that I am working for a couple of reasons, which I'll talk about after we've looked at construction. And we'll look at the kind of work in progress of my new patch bay and why I'm laying things out in a certain way. And I know a few of you have asked about how to design a patch bay. So in this series, you're going to see me kind of from the very beginning, looking at the way that I'm laying out my patch bay and also how it's going to change as we get closer to refining things. So we're probably a couple of months away from completing the build project at the moment. So let's check out the first stage of building. And the first step was to demolish an old barn that has an asbestos roof and was pretty ugly and not really adding anything to the kind of surroundings. And we're going to replace that with a building that's much more sympathetic to the surroundings, built in Cotswold stone. So I'm going to talk you through this first part. So as you can see, this is the old barn. It's got a roof made of asbestos, so we had to be really careful about how that was stripped out. Specialist equipment and specialist disposal. And we gradually took this down over a period of a few days. Amazing how quickly things come down when you think how long it takes to put them up. But this little section here was my kind of temporary studio, which I was using, which was a little workshop on the side of the barn. So the first thing to do is to get rid of all of this stuff that you end up with when you've demolished something. Underneath where we're looking at here is a kind of concrete slab that the barn was built on. It didn't have massive foundations or anything like that, but there is a whole load of slab that needs to be kind of grubbed up, as the builders say, before you're down to the kind of earth. So we have to get rid of tons and tons of material here. And then once you've got the ground clear, you've got to kind of get things level before you can start looking at building your foundations. So we kind of measured out everything, got the ground level, burying a couple of water and electrical pipes here before we start. And then the ground is prepared with the foundations for the building. So this involves digging a series of trenches. Again, everything really, really carefully measured to make sure that the heights are absolutely correct in the trenches. And then the guys would block up sections of the trenches with these boards before pouring in liquid concrete. And this, although it kind of goes quite slowly, is actually surprisingly liquid when you see it set surprisingly quickly as well. So that became the foundations. Now, first thing to do is to build the inner shell of the building. Now, the inner shell of the building is built from breeze block. So even though we're constructing something that is going to look like it, well, it's going to be a Cotswold stone barn, the interior is still breeze blocks. This has one huge advantage for us in terms of building a studio. You get something that is incredibly good at keeping noise out and in as well, but keeping noise out from outside. Now, the flooring that we're using here, you can see, is called block and beam. It's a lot quicker and easier than laying a giant concrete slab like the one you just saw us take up. But the advantage, again, it's incredibly solid. And we're going to be using that for both the ground floor and for the ceiling of the studio as well. And there's some space above the studio, which is going to be used for kind of storage and a little office and stuff like that. So as we build up the exterior of the building, you can see it's starting to take shape. So from the left to the right, we've got the control room in the main part of the building. And then on the end here, you can see the bricks going up around what is going to be the machine room. And we'll have a kind of loo and a small little kind of kitchenette-y bit in the corner. So you can see placeholders for the door frames going in and the window frames. And here's an overview of the building, so you can see kind of roughly where we've got up to. Once the builders have got to a certain height, then they start to lay the exterior wall, just a few bricks at the bottom there, and then putting the insulation materials in. And then that gradually gets built up. It's an incredibly skilled and laborious process. And obviously, when you get any kind of rain or anything like that, it has to be covered up while the mortar is still wet, so that you don't get horrible kind of staining going down the outside of the building. The larger stones that you can see in the corners are called coins, and a lot of this stuff is kind of reclaimed. It's one of those things where you can be incredibly environmentally friendly and reuse lots and lots of these kind of materials. So these are reclaimed coins. So as you can see, we've got the interior breeze block wall, we've got our insulation, and then we've got an exterior Cotswold stone wall. There are sections here at the front which are going to have wood paneling. That's a kind of decorative feature, so it doesn't look like a kind of giant stone mass. But again, it doesn't affect the kind of interior soundproofing of the room. So the next section is to build up the scaffolding around the outside of the building so that the guys can start building upwards from the ground floor. And you can see it's exactly the same. As you go up, you're going to get to a certain point on the far side where we have what's called a cat slide. So the upper part of the building is slightly narrower than the lower part, but you put, if you can imagine a cat sliding down a roof, that's the idea, and then that's going to be a little bit of extra floor space on the ground floor, which doesn't need to kind of increase the mass of the building upstairs as well. So the process that you're watching at the moment takes place over maybe 3 months, 3 to 4 months. It's a kind of war of attrition, like so many things in the music industry. And you can see here the beams are going in, which are going to help to support the upper floor of the building. These are actually relatively light and can be kind of placed in position without using cranes. But when we get to the block and beam, those slabs are incredibly heavy and need to be craned into place. So here's a quick look across this stage of building. You can see the individual skins of the building and also the beams in place ready for the next stage. Okay, so let's have a look at the kind of first plan for my patch bay. So one of the things to note at this stage is ignore all of the normalization, cable ID stuff and connectors. I haven't fixed any of that yet. This is kind of from a template of an old patch bay that is actually my current patch bay over here. So that stuff is wrong at this stage. All I'm concentrating on at the moment is the routing of what I'm having going to where. So that's the key thing that I'm looking at the moment. Now you can see in the top left-hand corner over here, we've got a number of synths which are going through to a Neve 8816. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this summing mixer to sum the synth signals into a stereo pair. It's a way of kind of minimizing the number of inputs I need for various different things that I've got going into my Logic, into my Apogee, which I'm using as my main kind of Logic input. And the only downside of that is that then when you're bouncing this stuff out, then you need to either patch them directly, or if we still want the sound of going through the 8816, then you need to bounce this stuff separately. So that is the slight downside, but the advantage is that it enables me to stick with my single Apogee, to have all of the things that I want going into that, and to be able to hear all of my synths at the same time as well. Now, one of the things I wanted to be able to do was to use the Neve as a summing mixer as well. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to have a separate extra little patch bay thing, which has got DL connectors. So I'm going to be able to wholesale switch the Neve from where it is now, in other words, taking the output from the synths to taking the output from the Apogee, from Logic or from Pro Tools, whatever I happen to be mixing in, and then sending it back again. That's also really useful for this section here, which is my new tape deck. I say new, obviously it's not new, but it's a new departure for me. It's actually going back to my roots where I started. When I started writing music professionally, everything I did went to 24 tracks. So I was very, very adept at using tape and all the benefits of that. And then as kind of disc recording came in, I kind of moved away from that, and so I'm finally getting back to that. Now what I'm going to do with the tape deck is I'm going to use that for recording direct to, so mic pre's going into the tape deck, but I'm also going to use it for bouncing stuff out and then back in again. I'm going to use it partly as a kind of transfer medium to get certain things to have a tape sound. It's never quite as good as when you record directly onto tape, so that's going to be my primary use, but there is a benefit to putting stuff on tape and then taking it off again. So you'll notice that that comes up in the patch bay here in its own little section without anything really going in and out of it. And the reason for that is that I want to have it accessible, but my main use of it is going to be with these DL connectors, is going to be patching it in wholesale across the Apogee, for example, in order to transfer stuff, or for replacing the Apogee input with the tape input wholesale, so that all of my mic pre's just go straight to tape. So this kind of patch bay is the kind of micro control of things, but there's going to be another panel, probably a 3 or 4U panel, which will have these DL connectors, which will be a kind of master bay or a kind of meta patch bay. I like that. So let's have a look at other stuff on here. So in the top section, I've also got outboard stuff going on. So I've got various things here, outboard gear, which I use, and this tends to be the stuff that's either in my master chain, so I'm sending stuff to this, my overall mix to this, or it's the kind of key pieces of outboard compression and EQ that I would patch in on a track, and either bounce that in or maybe just leave it as I'm working on a track. So across from there we've got my guitar stuff, so my Timeline and Big Sky and so on. And then we've got a couple of Muga Fuga pedals here. So that's all going in a pedal system that Justin at Studio Creations is making for me. And we'll talk about that in a future episode. It's a design that he's kind of come up with. At the end, we've got the S-Conv. This is something that enables you to go from unbalanced to balanced and vice versa, and also a level change if you need to on that. So that's the plan, and as you can see, everything that I've got in here, I've pretty much got the output and the above the input. Now those are not going to be normalized together for obvious reasons, but it's a logical way to do it. And I've thought about putting my master chain in so that my EQ goes to my compressor, goes to my MAS and all that kind of stuff, but I kind of like being able to change that stuff around, and I think it will become a little bit it's just a bit of extra confusion if you have to try and work out where you interrupt the chain in order to get back to kind of a kind of starting point. So my decision was to kind of go for very straightforward, each piece of equipment in its own little block, so that everything I'm doing, I'm patching, and it's a deliberate choice. I know where I'm putting everything and what order I'm putting everything in. Down here we have one of my lunch boxes, which has got some EQs in, the Neve 524s, which I've planned for, but don't actually have yet. That's a kind of future stage of the development of the studio, but I want to plan everything in that I'm going to want to get eventually, so that I know where it's all going to go. Also the double wide and the optograph don't have those yet in the studio, so that's again a future expansion thing. Down the end here we've got 3 parallel lines, and we've got a phase reversal line. I'd find that I had a few more parallels on here, but I've actually found that I haven't used them at all. Now I know that they can come in useful, so I don't want to give up on those. And I think that it's definitely worth planning them into the patch bay, but at the moment I haven't used them. Again, the phase reversal, I haven't used that either. You'll see that there's a 10 space here, which is for another lunchbox. Again, I'm planning forward and thinking that that's going to be where I put maybe some more lunchbox stuff if I expand further. So let's look at the final Bantam Bay 3, which obviously is incorrectly labelled at the moment. This is where my Apogee ins and outs are. And at this stage, what I've got is I've got my mic pre's, all of my mic pre's going into my Apogee. So those are here. The first 10 are lunchbox pre's. So the APIs and the Neves, which I've got at the moment in my API lunchbox, I'm putting those into a 10 slot. And that'll give me another 4 slots available for any other pre's that I want to add. I've got a 4-channel undertone audio mic pre, and then we've got a couple of channels. We've got the Chandler TG channel and the Shelford channel, and then my Neve summing mixer out. So at the moment, this is obviously for my synth kind of combined summed mix, but also you'll notice that it's on 17 and 18. And this is just to help me mentally, so that when I'm doing a summing mix from my apogees, that will be channels 1 to 16 going into the Neve. And again, that will be me taking my apogee outputs and using those DL connectors to connect the whole thing to the inputs of the summing mixer. And then the output of the summing mixer will come in on 17 and 18, which will be my master bounce in for Logical Pro Tools, whichever. I've got my Neve 8801 channel, which is the main channel that I use for kind of voiceover stuff, doing this kind of thing, doing the videos. And that goes into 19. And then the only other thing that's going in the analog channels of the Apogee is the outputs from my M7. And then obviously you can see over the other side, the inputs of my M7 coming from channels 23 and 24 of the Apogee. The Apogee also has 8 digital channels which go to my TC6000, so that is all AES, so we don't have to worry about that on the patch bay. And then the final bit of the puzzle is the Apogee outputs that come to the monitoring system. So it's my Grace M905, and that will feed from the Apogee outputs kind of 1 to 4, giving my 2 if I ever want to do a headphone mix or anything like that. And then I've got duplication over some panel outputs, which give me an extra output from the Apogee on the patch bay, which I can use to come up on a panel somewhere in the room if I need to send an output somewhere else as well. Again, it's not a feature that I've used, but it's worth planning some of this stuff in, because you never know, and then it's easier once it's in there and you can use it rather than having to get the whole patch bay out and add stuff on. Down the bottom we have an extra panel here which has some tie lines. This is, I'm still going to do this, so they'll be directly below the patch bay, but it's less important now that I'm going to be using tie lines around the room as well. And we'll look at the planning of the room in the next video. So that's an overview of the patch bay. As I say, it's a work in progress and none of the data is correct yet, but I will be working on that. Once I'm happy that I've got everything in the right place, then we'll go through and with Justin, and we'll sort out exactly where the cable runs are going to go, make sure that all the connectors are correct, and just make sure that our logic is correct in terms of the DL connectors, that when we plug things around, we're going to get exactly what we're hoping for. So that's a quick look at stage 1 of the studio build. In the next part, we'll look at the continuing construction to the kind of shell of the building, and we'll start to look at how we are planning the interior of the building, and then we'll follow that through with exactly how you construct the internal materials and how you soundproof and all of that kind of stuff. As I say, the great thing about building something completely from scratch and getting this very, very solid, almost triple skin construction is that there's going to be very, very little sound leakage, and the weak points are going to be the doors and the windows. So we'll look at that in the next one as well, what materials we're using for those and how we're preventing sound from getting out and coming in. And then as we go further down the road, we'll look at tuning the sound of the actual room itself. Hope so this has been interesting. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.